A major win for Donald Trump, and yes, the Second Amendment, as the big, beautiful bill has just been voted on and passed the House of Representatives. This is the Senate version of the big, beautiful bill. It has some things in there that are not perfect for the right to keep and bear arms, but they establish a beachhead. Basically, we have won D-Day, and now we're going to go in for the huge victory, which is going to happen when it comes to these NFA items. But overall, this big, beautiful bill is a major win for all of America, the entire country, and the Trump administration, which we in the Second Amendment community desperately need. Because again, we don't want to lose in the midterms in 2026 or in 2028 to terrible, terrible anti-gunners. The good news is, I don't think that's going to happen given this big, beautiful bill. Let's break down this, the parliamentarian, all the issues going on without it, so you know, in my view, what's really going on here, and I think you're going to be happy. Let's talk about it. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. All right, folks, so the House of Representatives has just voted on and approved the Senate version of the big, beautiful bill. This is a huge win for the country, a huge win for America, a huge win for the Republican Party and Donald Trump. Massive win, 100%. Okay? Now, is it perfect? No, nothing is perfect in these kinds of things. Could it have been improved when it comes to the Second Amendment? Yes, if the parliamentarian understood law, but she obviously doesn't. But we're going to get to that in more detail in just a few moments. To begin with, let's look at the highlights of the big, beautiful bill. Then we're going to talk about what it says for the Second Amendment, and then we're going to talk about next steps and a few other observations you need to know to be the smartest person in the room. To begin with, just on brand, it is extremely important, in my view, for the Republican Party and the Donald Trump and the Make America Great agenda to succeed. As we've talked about it before, if they do not succeed, we will be facing a President Kamala Harris or President Josh Shapiro or something equally terrible in charge of picking judges, picking Supreme Court justices, running the Department of Justice and the ATF, and so on and so on. This would be catastrophic for the Second Amendment, in addition to the fact that if you flood the country with illegal aliens and other immigrants that have literally zero connection to our American tradition of the right to keep and bear arms, private gun ownership for self-defense purposes, you will ultimately destroy our culture. And if you destroy our culture here in the United States, you will ultimately, in effect, destroy the right to keep and bear arms through various things like elections against people that hate in favor of people that hate guns, and of course, allowing laws to stand with terrible anti-American judges, which we've seen in part already during this first part of the Trump administration. So with that said, let's hit the highlights. You know the big parts of the big, beautiful bill, which is good for the country. It extends the 2017 tax cuts that Donald Trump enacted. This was by far and away, and you know, my big issue is the Second Amendment. That's a fact. But the reality is on the ground is Donald Trump had to extend and make permanent his 2017 tax cuts, which are expiring this year. If President Trump and the Republican Party failed to make those tax cuts permanent, we were going to be hit with massive tax increases at the end of the year, and this would have undeniably thrown this economy into a recession, and a bad economy would have caused the Republicans and all the good work we've done in the Second Amendment to be swept out to sea. It had to be done. This big, beautiful bill does that. That is mission critical. Number two, when it comes to working class Americans, the no overtime on tips, the no overtime on no tax on tips, no tax on overtime pay, no tax on certain auto loans. This, again, another campaign promise delivered by President Trump. It's extremely important that his campaign promises be delivered on. And of course, in my view, one of the most important issues by far is immigration. We have to close the border, which Donald Trump has simply done, and kick out these 20 plus illegal aliens. They've got to go. They've got to go. They are terrible for the Second Amendment movement. They are terrible for America. And again, it's not that they're good or bad people. That's not the point. The point is they've got to go because these illegal aliens are mostly in these blue states, which are giving the blue states extra Congress people. They're giving the blue states extra electoral clout when it comes to the vote for the President of the United States. We're given undue power to places like New York, places like Illinois, places like California. These are anti-gun havens. We have to deprive them of money. We have to deprive these places of power, and you have to kick the illegal aliens out, not just generally speaking because it's good for America and they're all criminals because they're only in the country because they're criminals, but it also takes away political power from the terrible anti-gun states. All of this is being addressed in this big, beautiful bill, among other things. So I'm extremely happy that this has passed. Now, let's turn to the issue at hand. This is a big kerfluffle in the Second Amendment community. This should not be a kerfluffle. Let me cut to the chase of the reality on the ground about the Second Amendment issue when it comes to the National Firearms Act and the big, beautiful bill. First of all, I have to thank and congratulate the Second Amendment organizations, in particular the gun owners of America, that have worked so hard to frankly have the biggest victory when it comes to the National Firearms Act for the Second Amendment since the 1930s. We have never seen in American history since the enactment of the National Firearms Act a bigger win against the National Firearms Act, and this is not the end. I told you at the start of this video, the victory here on the NFA, which we'll get to in just one second, is essentially establishing a beachhead. A beachhead. You know the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? The answer is one bite at a time. That's exactly how we destroy these gun control laws in America, which we're doing at one bite at a time. So when it comes to the NFA, as you know, the way the scheme works, and we've talked about it on the channel before, the way it works is the National Firearms Act was enacted by one of the worst American presidents, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and it was designed specifically as a tax because they thought if they did anything else, it would violate the Second Amendment and so on and so on. So they enacted it as a tax. Now, here's the key to understand. I agree with every single person out there that says the following. The registration requirement of suppressors, the registration requirement of short barrel rifles, the registration requirement of short barrel shotguns, and the fingerprinting requirement, and all that nonsense is the worst part of the NFA. It is worse than the $200 tax stamp per item. I agree. I also agree, as I've explained before, that because the National Firearms Act is undeniably a tax, as we've seen in many instances, including Supreme Court precedent, both in 1937 in the Szynski case, which is still good law. And why do we know it's still good law? Because in 2012, as I've covered on this channel, Chief Justice John Roberts in the National Federation of Independent Businesses versus Sebelius case, which affirmed Obamacare, by the way, reminded everyone that the Szynski case was still good law and the NFA was still good law and it was still a tax. And the reason why it's so important that the National Firearms Act is a tax is that you should have been able to remove suppressors, short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns entirely from the National Firearms Act 100% because you're modifying a tax law using the reconciliation process. But the reality is we have a Harry Reid appointed parliamentarian by the name of Elizabeth McDonough, whose legal credentials are, let's just leave it as mixed, in my opinion. And she ruled that the only thing that was allowed under the Reconciliation Byrd Amendment rules was that you could zero out the taxes on these items, but you could not remove them from the entire NFA because the other components, like the registration and fingerprinting requirement, was not subject to reconciliation, thus required to go through a 60-vote Senate and overcome a filibuster. Now, this is hooey, by the way. It's legally wrong. But again, the question is, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And there were two paths. Okay, here's the reality on the ground. There are two paths. When the parliamentarian made this terrible judgment, in my opinion, that says that you could zero out the taxes, you could go from $200 to zero on these suppressor short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns. But you could not remove them from the NFA entirely and thus get them away from the registration requirements under the NFA. There was two approaches that the Republicans could take. The first approach is what ultimately happened, which is to be like, it's wrong, it's crazy talk, this person's simply inaccurate, but we're going to pass it as is, and we're going to let the NFA items get knocked down in court, which I think is going to happen. But set that issue aside. That was one way of doing it, which is what they did. Now, the other way, and this is what I want to talk about, there's a lot of people out there on X in the Second Amendment community who I respect, are upset that the Republicans did not go all the way and fire the parliamentarian or override the parliamentarian's ruling. Now, my thought on that is if you're going to fire the parliamentarian, I would have fired her a year ago. Meaning I would have fired her as soon as I got on the job as the Senate Majority Leader. If you're going to fire the parliamentarian, you don't do it when you need her. You don't do it in the middle of the battle with her. You needed to get rid of her as soon as Republicans came into power at the start of this year. That's when you needed to fire her. But they didn't do it. They didn't do it. And I don't control that, and you don't control that. That's just the reality of it. There's good and bad and ugly of this. Okay? So the question is, why didn't the Republicans fire her? Well, I'll tell you why I think they didn't do it. I haven't talked to anybody, but I'm going to tell you the reality, what's going on in their minds, and that's this. You may remember, this is going back in time, but this is an important lesson. The last time the parliamentarian was fired was involving, I think, Nelson Rockefeller in 1975. The parliamentarian has not been overridden and or fired in any way for decades. It's just not part of the tradition. Now, you may be like, Mark, who cares about tradition? Just do it. Win the battle and move on. Well, there's sometimes we have to think about long-term effects of decision-making. You know how I've often told you that when you represent clients, when you think about the law, you have to think about the metaphor of a spider web, a big spider web. When you pull one single strand on that spider web, what happens? The entire spider web moves. So before you pull that strand on that spider web, you better think down the chessboard. You better look out into the future and ask yourself, how is that entire spider web going to move? And are you going to be happy with that? And I'm going to give you an example where the Democrats played a short-term political game and they got, frankly, kicked in the dupa. And that is this. There was a fight involving Barack Obama's judicial appointments to the D.C. Court of Appeals. Now, the D.C. Court of Appeals is a very important court, as you know, because they oversee all those administrative agencies, and they're basically the court of deep state. So the Republicans in the Senate were holding up using the filibuster to slow down the appointees and the confirmation process of these Democratic appointed judges by Barack Obama to the D.C. Court of Appeals, to the D.C. Circuit, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. Harry Reid, and listen carefully, folks, this is important. You got to understand the connection here. To make you the smartest person in the room, these are the connections you have to understand so you don't just say stupid crap on the internet, okay? Harry Reid, the Democrat, got rid of the filibuster as applied to judicial nominees. That's what he did. Why? Because he wanted to fill the D.C. Circuit full of Democrats with Barack Obama appointees. And that's exactly what he did. That's exactly what he did. He got rid of the filibuster as applied to judicial appointees. And then he confirmed a bunch of Barack Obama appointees to the federal bench. And all the Democrats are like, yay, yay, we show those Republicans. We got rid of the filibuster as applied to judges. Well, guess what happened, folks? Donald Trump was elected. And that filibuster was no longer in place, which meant that Donald Trump could put on the federal bench judges and Supreme Court justices who in the past Republicans never could have gone on the bench because they would have been too quote-unquote radical. They never could have overcome a Democratic filibuster. But because Harry Reid set the precedent for getting rid of the filibuster as applied to judicial appointments for the benefit of the politics of Barack Obama, when the Republicans got into power, we took it to them. And we got powerful judges along the lines of Justice Antonin Scalia. In fact, it's reported that when Harry Reid got rid of this filibuster, it is reported among the constitutionalist, originalist community, that it is reported that Antonin Scalia told people you're going to see a lot more judges on the federal bench just like Antonin Scalia because now you can get them on the bench over what used to be a Democratic filibuster. But because Harry Reid's gotten rid of the filibuster, the Democrats can no longer stop through a filibuster the appointment of radical, conservative, originalists, whatever you want to call these people, who would not otherwise have been able to get through a Senate filibuster if Harry Reid had not done that. So the point is that in 2021, when Joe Biden was the president, they took out of the Democrats' big budget bill an increase in the minimum wage, and Kamala Harris, the vice president of the Senate, had a chance to override the parliamentarian and chose not to. So the fact that J.D. Vance and the Republicans chose not to override the parliamentarian and fire her right now really speaks to that issue of Harry Reid making an adjustment for short-term political gain in order to pass the Democratic bill, and in the context of Harry Reid, to get more Democrats on the federal bench, but it ultimately blew up big time, because I will tell you this 100%. We were never going to get a stronger conservative candidates on the U.S. Supreme Court than Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch if you had a Democratic filibuster. If you had a Democratic filibuster, we would be getting terrible outcomes by the U.S. Supreme Court. So Harry Reeve gave us that great Supreme Court we now have with all those big wins. Okay, now let's turn back to the NFA. Why am I happy? And why do I say we've just won D-Day? Yes, the right answer was that these items should have been pulled out of the NFA entirely. That was legal. That was the right answer. But that's not the road we live in, folks. But that doesn't mean we take our football and go home and cry. No, we keep fighting because we're going to win this one. Because now that the taxes on these three items, the short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, and suppressors have been dropped to zero, there is no longer a legal or constitutional hook under Article 1 of the United States Constitution for Congress to impose any kind of arms registry, any kind of fingerprinting, any kind of issue associated with the buying or selling of these items. And because there's no tax justification under Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution that says Congress has the power to tax, and there's no more tax on these items, they've just lost their legal and constitutional authority to do all that rigmarole. So yes, we in the Second Amendment community are going to have to take another step and bring these lawsuits. I think we will win these, and I think there's a reasonably good chance that the Trump Department of Justice might even agree with us on this point and say that we agree that there's no constitutional basis for the registration of these items to exist, and so on and so on. And of course, there's other things that can go on as well. So the bottom line is this, folks. I am not happy that the parliamentarian screwed up the legal reasoning and did not allow us to pull these items out of the NFA. That was wrong, and that was just poor. Poor judgment, poor legal reasoning, absolutely wrong in my opinion. Okay? I'm not happy at all about that. It irritates me to no end, I can assure you. With that said, in the real world in which we live, we must celebrate the big, beautiful bill, not only because of the advancement, the first time really ever have we attacked and made inroads against the NFA, and this is just a start. Like I said, we won D-Day, and now we're going to march to Berlin, and that's going to be what happens next when we knock these items out of the NFA. We've won D-Day, we've got the beachhead, and now we march to Berlin. That's how to view this. And by the way, again, no one supports the Second Amendment more than I do, but in the real world, we must understand that the economy, working class Americans, making money, keeping businesses afloat, keeping our country safe and secure for Americans, by Americans, to support our American heritage, celebrates the 4th of July, not the 1619 Project, wants closed borders. We don't want foreign invaders in any respect, doesn't trust China to come in and steal our intellectual property through the university system, and so on, okay? All of these things are fantastic because everything in the big, beautiful bill is whacking terribly the other side. And that other side, my friends, is the side that wants to disarm you and convert you from being an American citizen into American serf or an American subject. So anything we can do to shut down the other side, whether it be on the economy, whether it be on energy policy, whether it be on border security, whatever it is, this has the effect of protecting our right to keep and bear arms. Because if the other side gets in there, in the House, in the Senate, or the White House, they will do everything they can to disarm us, to take away our money, to take away cash, and do all sorts of other terrible things to relegate us from American citizens and American patriots into subjects and serfs, and perhaps even worse. So be happy about what has happened here. We are better off today than we were 6 months ago. We are better off today than we were a week ago. And the reality is we have more fighting to do, but the trend is our friend, my friends, and never, ever, ever, ever let the perfect be the enemy of the good, or in this case, in my view, the great. So there you have it, folks, and congratulations. I want to thank again all those great Second Amendment supporters that fought like heck in D.C. to try to get all this over the finish line for the Second Amendment, and they did a fantastic job. Great kudos to them. We didn't get all the way we needed to get, but that's not their fault. That was because of the parliamentarian, and I understand why the Republicans didn't roll over on the parliamentarian because of the Harry Reid example. I do understand it. Do I agree with it? It's not for me to say, but the reality is I do understand it, and I think in the end, we are going to win these wars, but we must do them one battle at a time, and this is a big battle to have won. So there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you follow me on X at @4boxdiner. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble, and I look forward to talking to you all again real soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.